Now, London's Mayor Sadiq Khan has this morning given evidence to the COVID inquiry, talking about his frustration about being left out of key decision-making.
Khan told lawyers that he was furious at being excluded from key Cobra meetings, arguing that he would have lobbied the Prime Minister to go into lockdown sooner.
It was me that lobbied the Prime Minister to go to lockdown. It was me that lobbied the Prime Minister in relation to the inability to keep social distance on public transport, so people shouldn't be using public transport unless they had to. The point I was making, my lady, was had I been at earlier Cobras, I could have pointed out some of the reasons why community transmission was going to accelerate in London. Because I wasn't present there, those views weren't heard and weren't responded to.
Oh, Hugh, if only Sadiq Khan ruled the world, it would be a better place.
No, it wouldn't.
We're joined now by Dr Roland Salmon, a consultant epidemiologist and former director of the Communicable Disease Surveillance Centre. Thanks so much for joining us. Is he right, though? You know, Sadiq Khan saying that he thinks the government were a bit confused in what they said. And London, of course, being the most populated city, huge population density, loads of people piling onto the tube, being told to go back to work, but try and avoid taking the tube if you can. And Sadiq Khan saying, well, look, I spoke to other mayors in other cities around the world, saw what they were doing and wished we were doing the same.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, the reasons that he advanced. There's precious little evidence to show that lockdowns work, certainly in any sustained way and certainly in proportion to their cost. And as far as I could see, Sadiq Khan's reasons for recommending them were to do with the fact that he talked to his mayoral chums all around the world. So if anybody wanted an illustration of the fact that in many respects this was a political fashion set in motion by Xi Jinping in Hunan and sort of spreading via Seoul and via Milan to other capitals of the world, here was it. I mean, I don't think at any point he was particularly claiming that he was in the possession of any direct data and evidence that might have led to this decision. I mean, the person I thought last week, which I have to say was a much more interesting week than this morning, who came out surprisingly well, was Chris Whitty. And I think he should probably wear his badge of delayer with some pride, because I think here was someone who did seem to understand the whole picture, even though I think he probably got rather rolled over by some of the other officials and scientists.
Well, Roland, you know, two great examples of exactly what, in my view, is wrong with this ludicrous inquiry. You have Chris Whitty, who last week we learned for the first time was actually quite reticent about lockdowns and was kind of embarrassed in the dock last week, going, oh, well, you know, don't go too far. I mean, I kind of like the idea of lockdowns. I just was slightly worried. You know, he kind of ashamedly admitted he might have been slightly worried about the prospect of what lockdowns. And then we get little old Mayor Khan there, sitting there, basically saying, oh, you know, if I'd have just been invited to this meeting, I'd have told them to lock down earlier, to lock down more extensively. So once again, two examples of what this inquiry is all about. It isn't about the response we should have come up with for tackling the pandemic. It is about how early we should have locked down and how extensively. If there was to be any point to this COVID inquiry whatsoever, it would also examine other alternatives, other solutions to a virus problem, surely, that don't include lockdowns, like Sweden, Belarus, all of which ended up with better death rates than us. This is the problem with this inquiry. It will not face the other side of the story. Should we have locked down at all?
I mean, I think it does seem to have an underlying narrative that the people conducting it seem rather signed up to. And yes, they are based on the fact that lockdowns work, they work effectively, and the sooner you do them, the better it's going to be. I mean, it's rather like the shaman who says that, well, this ritual only went wrong because there was some little bit of the dance or the song that you didn't quite do correctly. Whereas actually, I think any reasonable interpretation, particularly when you look at excess deaths across different countries, is that these sort of measures made precious little difference. I think there is an argument that action should have been taken sooner, but those actions were rather different things, like making sure what beds were available, seeing how you could deploy or redeploy staff according to how vulnerable they might have been or not been to getting the virus, making sure someone go down to the warehouse to see what the PPE stocks look like, someone give some thought to what sort of financial support you might need to give to those people who do need to stay at home, because certainly I'm not saying you should do nothing, but I think what we did do entirely lacked focus. And I'm not sure that that's a point that had been internalised by Sadiq Khan. I think the interesting thing about the mayors is, of course, they have very little by way of formal roles in either health or the control of communicable diseases. I mean, the positions are occupied on both sides of the political spectrum by adroit politicians, so they talk a good game, but by and large, they don't have much to do, which is, I think, why both the testimonies today haven't really been all that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, actually, if you want interesting, I recommend Eyes on America, because they've got their own version of a COVID inquiry taking place and some fascinating stuff coming out there, including the revelation that apparently the Secretary of State, Director of National Intelligence, all said very early on, we think this virus is coming out of Wuhan. Fauci saying, no, it's not. Big explosion now in America, where it turns out Fauci was probably trying to cover that up because of his fingerprints on that Virology Institute. If we had known earlier about the provenance of the virus and people weren't called conspiracy theorists for pointing at that Virology Institute, would it have made any difference? Would we have been able to get a vaccine out sooner or known how to control this?
I mean, I think it's a fascinating story where the virus came from. Did it emerge, as was originally thought, from connection with animals, or was it in some sense a laboratory escape? And, you know, quite a lot of laboratory escapes have occurred with quite serious consequences in the past, but I honestly don't think it would have made much difference either to the response or the timing of the response.